Welcome to Original vs. Reboot, the show where we take reboots and remakes and compare them to their original films. And today we're comparing a 1947 version of The Miracle on 34th Street with the 90s version of Miracle on 34th Street. Regardless of which one you love, both of these movies are Christmas classics and movies everyone should watch every Christmas. Which is a nice change of pace from the last Original vs. Reboot we did about Dread, because I didn't really like either of those movies. On this one, Miracle on 34th Street, I love both versions of this movie. And that's going to make it a really tough comparison, because both movies have a lot of similarities. They actually tell the same story, more or less, with a little bit more in the 90s version. The runtime of the original is an hour and a half-ish, and the runtime of the 90s version is about 2 hours. Now, the basic story of Miracle on 34th Street, in both cases, is that there's a Santa Claus who just happens to have come to New York, and he goes around, finds a Santa Claus who's in a parade, who's drunk, and he tells him he's a disgrace to the Santa Claus myth, I think. And the long and short of it is the new Santa Claus takes his place, ultimately ends up working in a department store. In the original, he works in Macy's. In the newer version, the 90s version, he works in Kohl's. But the woman in both instances who hires him is a woman who does not believe in Santa Claus and doesn't teach her daughter about Santa Claus. However, in the original, she goes further to not teach her daughters about fairy tales or any myths of any kind. So we're introduced in both movies to a young girl who doesn't believe in Santa Claus. However, this new Santa Claus in town has her questioning everything because he seems like the real deal. The more and more the girl sees in both versions of the movie of Santa Claus, the more she starts to believe that this is the actual Santa Claus and he may actually exist. In the original movie, there's a nice little scene where a girl comes along who speaks Dutch and only Dutch. The little girl sees Santa Claus speak Dutch to this new girl, and she realizes this guy is something special. In the 90s version, they changed that to a deaf child who only speaks with sign language, and Santa Claus spoke sign language to her. It's a nice scene in both movies. So the little girl, ultimately, in both movies, ends up asking Santa Claus to prove that he's the Santa Claus by getting her the one thing she wants for Christmas. In the 40s version, she asks for a house. In the 90s version, she asks for a house, a brother, and a father. That's a tall order. I especially don't want to know how Santa Claus is going to make that baby, but I'm sure he'll do it. You know, could make a joke here, but this is a Christmas special, so I won't do it. Trying hard not to. It's very difficult. There is a side story or a secondary story in this one, but it's different in both movies. This is where the main difference in the movies comes along. In the 1940s version, there's a psychiatrist or a therapist working for the department store that Santa's working in, and he doesn't like Santa Claus, mainly because he questioned him at some point, and he takes up a vendetta against Santa Claus and wants to have him institutionalized because he keeps saying that he's the actual Santa Claus. In the reboot, the 90s version, there's a rival department store who want that Santa Claus to be their Santa Claus because it's taking away business. However, Santa Claus turns him down, so they set out on a smear campaign against Santa Claus. They set him up. He attacks someone on the street and gets sent to a mental institution because he failed a psychiatric test on purpose, which he does in the original as well, but for different reasons. But the long and the short of it in both movies is that ultimately we end up with a court case where Santa Claus could be institutionalized because he thinks he's Santa Claus, and that's kind of crazy. However, the court case in both films is slightly different. In the original movie, they set out initially to prove that Santa Claus is insane and isn't actually Santa Claus, but that quickly changes to, does Santa Claus exist in the eyes of the court? And is Kris Kringle, the man claiming to be Santa Claus, actually Santa Claus? In the reboot, they kind of have a mismatch in there. They're kind of trying to prove that he's insane and at the same time proving that Santa Claus exists. Not necessarily just that Kris Kringle is Santa Claus. The court case goes differently in both movies, but ultimately we come down to the deciding factor. And this is where the movie changes dramatically. In the original movie, the judge is worried about public opinion because he wants to be re-elected as a judge. He doesn't want to be the man to claim there's no Santa Claus and ruin all the children's hopes across the world. This judge basically needs some other institution to say that yes, Santa Claus exists in the eyes of the court. They never really show that point in the reboot. They just show that the judge wants to side with Santa Claus, but he can't because here's a man claiming to be Santa Claus, a mythical creature, as far as we know, a mythical character, I should say. The deciding factor comes because in the post office, someone sees a letter addressed to Santa Claus. It's actually from the main little girl to Santa Claus at the courtroom, because she's sending him a letter to say, I now believe you are Santa Claus. He's trying to get the little girl and her mother to believe that he is Santa Claus because belief in Santa Claus is going down and down and down, and basically they're the test subjects to prove that he can make people believe. She sends him this letter, which is also signed by her mother, claiming she also believes. And the post office, workers in the post office realize, hey, we've got loads of letters to Santa Claus. We can finally get rid of them by sending them to this court, sending them to this guy who's claiming to be Santa Claus. Now, in doing that, since the US Post Office, at least at the time, I don't know if this is still the case because I don't keep up on American politics that much. At the time, the post office was a part of the federal government. I don't know if it still is or if it's been privatized over there, don't particularly care. But that means that in the eyes of the government, Kris Kringle was Santa Claus. Therefore, the judge had an out, and he could now declare that since the post office and therefore the government see Kris Kringle as Santa Claus, the court would too, and rules in his favor. However, in the reboot, the reasoning comes a little bit differently, because Mara Wilson, who's playing the young kid in this one, hand delivers a card to the judge, and in the card is a dollar bill which has a red mark around the line, in God we trust, because America, being a God-fearing country, puts that on all their money for some reason. So the judge stands up and claims to the court that since God exists in the eyes of the American people based solely on belief, that Santa Claus too exists based solely on belief, and because Santa Claus exists, that this man claimed to be Santa Claus must be Santa Claus, which is kind of definitely clutching at straws. But hey, it works for the movie. But the movie's not done there yet, because the little girl still has to get her presents, which is also another reason why she's gonna decide if he is Santa Claus or not, even though she's already told him she believes he is. In the original, she's disappointed on Christmas Day because she doesn't get what she wants under the tree, even though what she wanted under the tree was a house. I don't know how that would work, but it worked in her mind. In the reboot, again, she's a little bit disappointed. However, there is a weird point in it, in that on Christmas Eve night, both the mother character and the male character who's been in it, who's also been the lawyer, they both get a card saying, meet me after midnight mass in this church. They both go there, and when they go there, in this empty church, there's a lone priest and an organist playing a wedding song. They're asked who's getting married, and he asks, are you ready to get married? They're basically put into a shotgun wedding and forced to get married. But go forward to the next day, Mara Wilson finds the ring, and she then just assumes that Kris Kringle has delivered on his promise. She now has a new father. She knows they're going to go see that house. And when they get to the house, someone who works in the department store comes along, hands the keys to the mother and says, Kris Kringle told me to give you these, more or less. But it's very on the nose that Santa Claus delivers the actual present. However, in the original, the kid is left disappointed. And you can see as they're on a car journey on Christmas Day, she's upset in the car. However, when they're driving past a certain house, she screams for them to stop. She gets out, she runs into this house, which is the house she wanted. And when she goes inside, she just says, Santa Claus did it. He delivered me this house. He's real. And the parents are skeptical, because even though it's the exact house she pictured, the exact house she wanted, they haven't actually bought it. They just walked into a random house. However, in the corner is a walking stick, which suggests Santa Claus has been here. Which is, I think, a better way to do it. It's a little more subtle. It just works a little bit better, and I think on the reboot is a little bit on the nose. I'd say both stories are interesting. I just think in the 90s version, they dragged the story out a little bit. They tried adding a little bit in, like the shotgun wedding, like her asking for a brother, and stuff like that. But both films have a lot of festiveness in it. Both of them have Christmas music, although in the 90s version, I think they integrated music much better. And ultimately, this is one of the toughest decisions I will ever have on original versus reboot as to which is better. Do I give it to the original? Because that's the original. They originally told that story and arguably told it a little bit better than the 90s version. However, the 90s version could be argued has better visuals, a better use of music, and possibly slightly a better Santa Claus in that Richard Attenborough is a fantastic Santa Claus. I think ultimately it has to come down to which has a certain element, which is the Christmas element, which is unique to original versus reboot. We don't generally consider this when comparing originals versus reboots, but on this special for Christmas, I think ultimately it has to come down to which movie is more festive and is more likely to put you in the Christmas spirit. And I do think that the original focuses more on the court case and whether this man is insane, more so than the Christmas aspect. So for that reason, in the slightest of slight margins, I'm going to give it to the reboot, which I realize may be controversial. But this is where I throw it over to you guys, because I want to know from you in the comment section below which is better, the original 1947 Miracle on almost said it, Miracle on 34th Street, or the 90s version of Miracle on 34th Street. With all that being said and done, there's only two things to say. Thank you so much for watching, and Merry Christmas.